the story of Maria von Trapp, or the Trapp family singers, and the movie was enacted by Julie Andrews. And in that movie, once they move to the United States, after they have left Austria, they are in very dire financial situation. But Maria, living in a small little flat, she buys a whole lot of things on credit. And her agent tells her, "You can't do that, you are poor." And she looks the agent in the eye and says, "I am not poor, or we are not poor, we just don't have money." That was in connection with, or in support to the statement made by the chair in the last session. The second little bit of an anecdote, and then we'll get on to the session proper. We started on the 17th evening, continued on the 18th, and now we are here on the 19th, right up to lunch. And all the sessions have been absolutely brilliant. The level of brilliance was such that it gave me another thought. And that thought brought me back to a very great concert which was being conducted, and the concert was about to close. And in the final moments of the conference, where there was pin drop silence, a little girl speaks up. "Curtain, please don't close." Well, the curtains are still open. We have got two very fine sessions coming up, one on spirituality and the other on literature. The first. He is an author, an Ayurvedic doctor, and a Vedanta teacher. He is the founder and director of the American Institute of Vedic Studies in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which offers education on yoga, philosophy, Ayurveda, and Vedic astrology. He has authored more than 30 books, published both in India and in the United States. He is a frequent contributor to the magazine Hinduism Today. In 2015, he was honored by the Indian government with the Padma Bhushan for his distinguished service of a high order to the nation, the second highest Padma Series award. He is also very active on Facebook and Twitter, and people like me, and hundreds and thousands of people like me, actively follow him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Dr. David Frawley. Ms. Dina Merriam has been a leader in the Vedic text. She graduated from Columbia University, specializing in sacred literature. In 2000, she helped in organizing the Millennium World Peace Summit of religious and spiritual leaders of the United Nations in New York. Ms. Dina Merriam, please. Mr. Christopher Quilkey. He is a member of the editorial board of The Mountain Path. The Mountain Path is a quarterly journal founded in 1964 by Arthur Osborne and published by Sri Ramanan Shraman. The aim of the journal is to set forth the wisdom of all religions and all ages, especially as testified to by their saints and mystics, and to clarify the paths available to seekers in the conditions of our modern world. Mr. Christopher Quilkey. Mr. Banagala Thero is the president and head priest of the Sri Lanka Mahabodhi Society. The government of Sri Lanka, in recognizing his contributions for social development and rehabilitation, made him the authorized representative of the Sri Lanka Ministry of Social Services in Japan for subjects connected with people who possess a disability. Mr. Banagala Thero. And finally, our fourth panelist, a German who came to India on a stopover on her way to Australia after finishing her psychology studies at Hamburg University. She then visited the Ardh Kumbh Mela in Hardwar in April 1980, where she met Sri Anandamayi Ma and Devaraha Baba, two renowned saints. She dived into India's spiritual tradition, sharing her insights on India's wisdom through her writings in German and English. Her first English book, Thank You, India, has just been released. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Maria Worth. Over to the chair.
Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. It's our great honor to be before you today, and we are addressing the cream issue of India's soft power, which is spirituality. But not just any spirituality, a very defined experiential spirituality of the Dharmic traditions. Yoga, Vedanta, Buddhism in all of its forms. I mean, there's just so many traditions here that are unbelievable. At the same time, they are now spreading globally in many forms, and many people are taking them up in different ways, not always understanding where they come from, their full application, or what they are. India's spread of Indic traditions has been India's greatest soft power achievement, and yet it has not been done with any government support or even any particular plan, and it also began before the independence movement of India back in the 19th century with Swami Vivekananda. So this is India's supreme soft power, this Bharat Shakti, this Jnana Shakti, Yoga Shakti. And this has the power to change India and change the world. And we can see from our panelists how much it has affected different people from throughout the world. That's also the reason why I came here and got involved in anything in this whole Indic tradition, Vedic tradition, because of that spiritual influence. And that soft power of spirituality is not just simply a matter of ideas, it's also teachings, but the great gurus. Sometimes people ask me, what drew you into this greater Vedic Hindu tradition? And it was the example of the great gurus discovering at a young age in my teens and being able to read figures like Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, Yogananda, Sri Aurobindo, Swami Chinmayananda, being in touch with Anandamoy Ma, being in touch with the Raman Ashram, being in touch with the Aurobindo Ashram, Swami Narayan, so many others. It is such a vast universe of spiritual knowledge that does not exist anywhere else in the world. I would say there are more spiritual paths, more approaches, more religions, more sadhanas, more gurus, more temples, more deities in this tradition than anywhere else in the world. And it has also seeded traditions from throughout the world, mystical traditions of various types, spiritual paths, new movements in meditation, mantra, deeper teachings, and so forth. So India's soft power is awake at a spiritual level, and we need to bring that into the outer practical level as well with the different aspects of culture, but by preserving that inner essence of the spiritual soft power, which is the Atma Vidya, the self-knowledge, which is the knowledge of consciousness as a transcendent reality, which is not simply dealing with outer aspects of human culture, but the universal culture of self-realization and enlightenment, which is the true goal of humanity. And this has been India's role as the Vishwaguru, the guru of humanity, which India did have for many centuries, if not thousands of years. And even today, that's still occurring at an inner level. India's gurus still travel worldwide. They have centers worldwide. There are great teachings going on. And it is changing the consciousness of humanity. So as we move forward into this new technology, we need this interchange of consciousness to deal with our technology in the proper way, to use it in the right manner, so we're not overwhelmed by that technology. So India's spiritual soft power remains more and more relevant and more crucial for the future survival of humanity and also for bringing our best benefits of all science and all culture together. So each of our speakers is going to address their own personal experience and share different sides of this vast aspect of spirituality, inner way of self-knowledge, inner way of knowing. Beyond, some people today say we're into spirituality but not religion. then you should follow the Indic traditions because that is their foundation and basis overall. So we will then go down the row here, and Dina will be our next speaker. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Namaste. I want to not only thank the organizers, but congratulate the organizers for pulling this together. As an organizer myself, I know how difficult it is, and you have done a phenomenal job, and you've started something very important. The issues that have been raised here are critical issues, and I hope this is just the beginning of a much more extensive discussion on some of these issues. So I will declare myself from the beginning. I'm a Hindu, and I have no problem using the H word. India's soft power came to me in two ways. First, in 1971, when I was a very young girl, I found my guru, or rather my guru found me, Paramahansa Yogananda, and I recognized myself soon after as a Hindu. I fell in love with Sri Ram and Mata Sita. I fell in love with Sri Krishna. I fell in love with Mahadev, with Mata Parvati, with Saraswati, with all of them. And I felt like I was in a candy shop and I could have it all. There was so much to have. And so to me, it was such a gift that I had found Hinduism. But in those days, one could not openly be a Hindu, especially if you were not Indian. So I became a hidden Hindu. I became a practitioner of Kriya Yoga. I did my study of the Upanishads and the Gita, and I spent 20 years involved in my meditation and my studying. And even though the Maharishi had come and we could now get T-shirts with Hanuman on it and with Mahadev on it, and I looked at these T-shirts and I said, well, I don't know how I feel about that. You know, yes, it's great, it's creating greater awareness, but Hinduism had now entered the marketplace, and you know what happens in America when something enters the marketplace. So this is the condition that I saw arising. And then the 1990s came along, and I met a man named Swami Dayananda Saraswati. And that was India's second soft power outreach to me. He encouraged me to get involved in the interfaith work. And anybody who knows Dayanandaji knows that his soft power is very powerful. I had no interest in interfaith. I was only interested in my meditation and my study of the Gita. On top of that, the interfaith world was a closed world. It was a boys' club. There were no women leaders in the interfaith movement. There were very few women religious leaders involved. There were no Hindus. There was a token Buddhist, maybe. And so I entered this world with a great deal of trepidation. And had I not had some great masters behind me, I don't know if I would have survived. It was very difficult. After I had organized this religious summit where we brought 108 swamis, there was huge pushback. What's happening now? Suddenly, there are Hindus coming to these interfaith meetings. We were not welcome. But I was invited to go to Saudi Arabia for a meeting with the World Muslim League in 2001. I was accompanied by a male colleague. And in those days, to get a visa to Saudi Arabia, you had to write your religion. So I wrote Hindu. That was my religion. Well, I arrived in Jeddah. They looked at me, they looked at my immigration form, and the man said, "You're not Hindu." I said, "But I am Hindu." "No, you're not Hindu." "Yeah, I'm Hindu." No. I thought they wouldn't let me into the country. But my male colleague intervened and said, "Yeah, believe me, she's Hindu." And so they let me in. But you can imagine how I felt needing my male colleague to affirm my religious identity. Well, I would say, harassed throughout my visit there about my religion. And I had the same experience when I went to Iran that year for a conference the UN had organized on religion and the environment. Again, I'm not Hindu, but I am Hindu. You're not Hindu, but I am Hindu. To add insult to injury, I was told, well, that's a strange religion. You worship monkeys and elephants? So I decided, well, I'll keep my mouth shut until I get home to make sure I do get home. But this inspired a new fire in me to come out more openly with my Hinduism. Now, that was 17 years ago. Everything has changed. 2 years ago, I went to Iran during the nuclear negotiations to bring a delegation of American religious leaders on a peace mission. Well, we were heavily Hindu and Buddhist, this delegation that I brought, and we had a lot of women. And so when I arrived, it was for a dialogue in Qum at one of the universities. I said to them, this is the new face of America's religion. We are no longer a Christian country. We're Buddhist, we're Hindu, we're inclusive. They were surprised, but they weren't as surprised as I was when I discovered what they call the cultural invasion from the East. Not only was yoga booming, but to deal with that, they put yoga under the Ministry of Sports. But I found that, and they were having yoga competitions, but what I found was that the yoga teachers, many of whom had been to Rishikesh, were holding meditations and doing chanting sessions in the home. There were Buddhas in their shops. It was considered chic to have a Buddha head in your home. So I saw this consciousness arising among the educated in Iran who were turning east. And if you go to Rishikesh, the ashrams are full now of Iranians and Russians and Brazilians, people from all over. So I saw the shift taking place. And of course, back in America, in the past 15 years, you see a huge shift, not only the yoga movement and meditation, which is mainstream now, but you can talk openly about kundalini and chakras and prana and pranayam and rebirth and karma. Even in the corporate setting, they'll say, oh, if we take this project, are we incurring bad karma? Everything can be talked about openly. I can openly say, yes, I'm a Hindu, and nobody's going to blink twice. So there's been a huge shift. And this has all been good. But there are some issues that have arisen that I want to present here. Some of them have been touched upon. One is the commercialization of the Dharma. And this is a very painful thing to see. And I'm very grateful that I came to Hinduism before I had to spend thousands of dollars to get a mantra or thousands of dollars to get my pranayam. You know, it's reached the point now where it's painful to see the commercialization. And it's not just in our Hindu Dharma, it's also with Buddhism and the mindfulness movement. How for $7,500 and you take a week of training and then you can go out and be a mindfulness teacher in the corporations and you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we have to talk about this. This has to be, and I've organized conferences in the US about the future of Dharma in America. Is this just going to be, are we going to let it just become another industry? Or are we going to look for a much deeper practice? At least if you're talking about yoga and mindfulness, talk about Dharma. At least bring the concept of Dharma into it. So that's one issue. The second issue I want to bring up is the sad thing that almost all of the spiritual teachers who come from India to the US disassociate themselves from Hinduism. They say they're not Hindu, and this is not Hinduism. This is painful to see. And I'm very fond of some of these teachers, and I say this with all due respect, but I no longer think it's necessary. You would never hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama say, I am not Buddhist, and what I'm teaching is not Buddhism. You would never hear the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh say that. None of the Buddhist leaders I know would say, I am not Buddhist, and the teachings I teach are not Buddhist. So why, in our Hindu Dharma, did the teachers come and say, I am not Hindu? I've heard it again and again. And I've heard the reasons. Well, we can attract larger audiences. Okay, it's important to get people to meditate. We have to, humanity is at such a crisis that we have to help people evolve, awaken. So yes, it's important to reach large audiences, but you don't have to disown Hinduism in order to do that. So I want to bring this up. It's a bit of a sticky subject because some of these teachers are quite big right now, and they've become businesses in a way. But I am so glad that I remember a time when Dharma was not a business. You didn't pay to get your Dharma, and you were not interested in large audiences. I remember my guru saying, He'd much rather have a small group of very serious meditators than a stadium full of people. So what are we really talking about here? But there are things that I can also celebrate. 2 minutes, okay. Some of the things that I can celebrate. When my Palestinian friend Ramallah, social psychologist who works with traumatized children in the Syrian refugee camps, calls me and says, Dina, can you bring me a Krishna from India? I need Krishna with me. When I meet a couple in Costa Rica on an interfaith journey there, where two people who have some land say to me, I found a statue of Ram on my land. Can you come help me build the temple to Ram? When my Sufi singer friend from Iran says, when he starts to incorporate Om Namah Shivaya into his Sufi songs, that gives me a lot of joy. When my Senegalese friend who works at the United Nations says, for years I've been waking up at 4 o'clock to chant the Gayatri Mantra, how it's changed my life. That gives me joy. And I'll end with a very brief story of another thing that gives me joy. When my grandson was in kindergarten, and he came home excited one day and said the principal of the school has a Ganesh on his desk. And he had a long discussion with him about Hinduism. And then he told me, I formed a little meditation group, and I'm teaching them Om Namah Shivaya. And I thought, oh no, my son is going to receive a call from the parents. But I soon met one of the parents, and they said, we love your grandson, Louis. He's taught our son Om Namah Shivaya, and we're all chanting it. So this is the glory of Hinduism.
Glasses. I thank the India Foundation for the invitation. It is an honor to be here to speak with you. Satya Nadella, the son of a Sanskrit scholar and a civil servant from Hyderabad, assumed the leadership of Microsoft in 2014. Okay. He was faced with a dilemma. In the preceding few years, Microsoft was in a slide as they tried to broaden the scope of the company. The old Microsoft style was obsessed with controlling their products. Like Apple, there was a Microsoft way, but eventually it became rigid and started to turn away potential buyers and users. Under Nadella, Microsoft opened up. It created open source projects, induced customers to use its cloud, and made its own software easily available. It even embraced Linux. Nadella decided the way forward was to be inclusive, not exclusive. What has this got to do with Hinduism? It's very simple. Nadella returned to basics and asked the crucial question, what does Microsoft do best? In the same way, we should ask, what does Hinduism do best? I use the term Hinduism for convenience. It really should be called the eternal Dharma. There are numerous ways to define the eternal Dharma, but none of them encompass all aspects of this unique religion. Unlike Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, it does not have a single progenitor. There are many so-called mythological and historical figures who propelled Hinduism in a new direction at a particular time. But no one single character is responsible. One could say that it is an astounding force or wave. It is as much alive today as it was for the ancient rishis. Something extraordinary happened some 4,000 years ago in the Indus Valley civilization of the disappeared Sarasvati River area. There appeared through the mouths of rishis, literally those who see, a series of chants that were collated and given the collective title the Vedas. The word itself can be roughly translated as knowledge, to acquire knowledge, to see. It is alive. It's a catalyst. It is not a dead fact. These chants are the basis of the eternal Dharma. They have survived all manner of vicissitudes over thousands of years. Yet, even today, they are the source and nourishment of what we know as Hinduism. Anyone who has heard the Vedas chanted in the right spirit by people who have been trained by long years of practice will come away with an indefinable and unforgettable feeling that has elevated them beyond their normal consciousness. Just as Satya Nadella understood that Microsoft, if it wished to survive and thrive, should do what it does best, we should realize that Hinduism can very well take care of itself if we allow it to do what it does best. As long as the Vedas are chanted, the eternal Dharma will find a way. Just like water in rivers that will overcome barriers in their drive forward. Like water, it can flow in any direction. It is spontaneous and infinitely supple. I shall quote from the Tao Te Ching, a beautiful description of the way in which it functions. Nothing in the world is softer or weaker than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and the strong. My generation, the generation of my age in India, is still anchored in traditional values. It is the next generation of young Indians being sold gadgets and consumer desires who are vulnerable. The roots that connect people to their native village are being severed. Families are becoming nuclear and sent to the far ends of the country or to other countries because of job opportunities. They are losing access to the invaluable wisdom of their elders. What is the solution? How can traditional values be preserved? Let us look at it another way. Hinduism has survived for all these centuries and will continue to do so if we encourage the essential bedrock. That is, the Vedas. I know this sounds like a simplistic answer. It is not. Hinduism is not a corporation concerned with profits. It does not have a meaning outside of itself. Gain and loss are irrelevant. Like water, it will find a way to express itself and nourish us in ways that we hardly dream of if we but allow it to. The key is the Vedas. There must be a conscious, deliberate, and sustained effort to preserve and chant the Vedas. The Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanams is one shining example of an organization that supports Veda Pathasalas. There should be more like it. Other measures, worthy though they are secondary. A building is only as strong as its foundations. Today, in the world outside of India, we see the spread of perhaps the most refined school of Indian philosophy, Advaita Vedanta. It started with Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Swami Vivekananda, but the driving force now can be attributed to a rishi from living memory, Ramana Maharshi. He was born in a small village near Madurai in 1879 and left this world in 1950. The moment he died, a meteor was seen across India right up to Mumbai. Without knowing who, people all over the south spontaneously said that a great soul had left this world. And so it was. Today, he is revered around the world. As a devotee of Ramana Maharshi, I cannot even begin to express my gratitude for his grace. I would not be here today without it. The importance of this great rishi cannot be underestimated. It is a subtle influence. He exemplified the purest elements of Indian philosophy and went right to the heart of our dilemma as human beings. Who am I? Ramana Maharshi showed us that whatever thoughts or emotions we have about ourselves, we are not that. There is a central core in us all that is universal and yet unique to each of us. He called it the self that cannot be touched by any thought. Sometimes we feel alienated, things happen which are beyond our control, and yet, though we may not verbalize it, we intuitively know we are part of a web of interdependencies, what is called Indra's web, or Indra's net. With time and experience, we begin to understand that we are all connected. This whole planet is but one living entity. On the world stage, this is also true. India may seem apart from other nations, but just look at this conference. Indian chefs, yogis, thinkers, and others are contributing to global society. This week, we are calling it soft power. We may also see it as a simple human interconnectedness. It is here that we should remember that the power of a great transforming thought, such as Einstein's flash of inspiration about relativity, is not dependent on quantity. It takes but one person, one experience, one understanding to transform our world. First, there is the principle, and then there are the elucidations. 2 minutes. Just as Ramana Maharshi realized in an instant the principle that governs life, we should also strive to understand who we are. For without that knowledge, even our best efforts are but a pale imitation of the blind leading the blind. First, we transform ourselves, and the world will develop harmoniously. We are the world, we are responsible. Though it seems that the world is out of control and we are heading recklessly in directions unknown, there is much more going on unseen that we are but dimly aware of. Be assured, the power of the eternal Dharma that envelops India is slowly pervading the group consciousness of the world. I would like to thank you for your attention and concern in this. I have one more point to make. This speech has dealt with generalities, but I also see practical steps that we might take. The outside world offers India so much. What can India offer the world? For instance, would it not be a fine gesture if India offered a large prize to the whole world for whoever presents a real solution to a global problem, such as preventing plastics further polluting the oceans? I know that there are many working on the problem, but certainly this would give it impetus. The India Prize could be accessible worldwide and might be an annual event. Experts can determine the details and conditions. The idea is to let India figure on the world stage as donors rather than supplicants. Finally, the key is not overt power, but to develop a subtle influence that gives rather than takes. Thank you.
Next, we have Venerable Banagalatero, and we're extremely honored to have him here. He's been to many India Foundation events, and he is a great inspiration for thinkers, Hindus and Buddhists all over the world. Please come.
our chairperson, Dr. David Frawley, our friends on dais, and dear friends. I am a missionary monk. I regularly receive invitation to attend discussion and seminars on various subjects of social, cultural, and spiritual issues. The invitation to attend this event aroused my curiosity because I did not know the term soft power. In preparing for these brief remarks, I asked myself the question, what is power? In the first place, forget about soft power and hard power. What is power? Those of you who wish to know how this great land of India can project its soft power need not go too far. It is in this land we call India that mankind discovered the most primal philosophy of power. The Buddha taught us about the power of mind, and that I believe is the true essence of what we call soft power. Our ability to discipline our own mind and therein win, persuade, and mobilize other minds. Buddha's teaching have defined the dimension of power. The Majjhima Nikaya and Sanyutta Nikaya have elaborated them. The power of knowing what is true and what is not. The power of knowing karmic causality at work in the lives of all beings throughout past, present, and future. The power of knowing all stages of concentration, emancipation, and meditation. The power of knowing the conditions of life of all people. The power of judging all people's level of understanding. The power of discerning the superiority or inferiority of all people's capacity. The power of knowing the effects of all people's actions. Power of remembering past lifetimes. The power of knowing when each person will be born and will die, and in what realm that person will be reborn. The power of eradicating all illusions. The Bhagavad Gita expresses it differently but arrives at the same discovery. The Gita tells us we must uplift ourselves through our own efforts by purifying our mind. Purity of thoughts can enlighten us, while impure thoughts will only cause us to regress. We have the power to be our own friend or the folly to become our own enemy. Let us now relate those ancient Buddhist wisdom on power to prevent day climate of conflict and debate. Mahatma Gandhi said, the day the power of love overrules the love of power, the world will know peace. What Gandhiji expounded in these simple words is a synthesis of Vedic wisdom and Buddha's enlightened vision of the human mind. In preparing for this brief intervention in this distinguished gathering, I try to understand what is meant by soft power in international affairs and our own conduct in democratic governance. Soft power is supposedly term coined by an American professor of political science, Joseph Nye. Today we are discussing how India, the world's largest democracy and home, diverse cultures, faith, and languages, can project its soft power of persuasion in advancing human progress and amity. Soft power is spiritual power and not military power or other forms of power exercised through the ability to create fear. Soft power, therefore, is our ability to obtain desired outcomes in our own interest by persuasion and trust. India does not have to discover the soft power. It only needs retraced history to the days of Emperors Ashoka and Kanishka and India's rich tradition of Buddhism. India's soft power is depicted in its national flag with its wheel of Dharma. That indeed is the most illustrative form of radiating soft power in appealing to the conscience of mankind. The Indian word Dharma is the single conceptual principle that defines the moral foundation of all Asian societies. Buddhism is the demonstrated soft power of India's that Emperor Ashoka forced to spread Indian influence the world outside. The soft power of Buddhism can again establish India's moral leadership as it was days of Ashoka and Kanishka. It is a cultural tool of enormous soft power. How can India make its Buddhist heritage an instrument of soft power? We have one of India's preeminent modern thinker, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, expanding how it can be done. He says there is a little of what we call dogma in the Buddha's teaching, with a bit of view rare in that age and not common in ours. He refuses to stifle criticism. Intolerance seems to him the greatest enemy of religion. That Buddha's breadth of vision is, to my mind, represent the totality of India's soft power. Now, please allow me to speak few words in Hindi because I am a Sri Lankan and I was born in Sri Lanka and my parents are Sri Lankans. Well, to establish, देखिए, नमस्कार. मुझे ऐसा प्रतीत होता है कि आप लोगों को देखते हुए जो मेरा भाषा जो है सिंहली है वो मेरा मदर टंग है. जो भाषा अभी हम बोल रहे हैं वो मेरा फादर्स टंग. ऐसा है, भारत और श्रीलंका एक बहुत पड़ोसी देश है और एक दूसरे के साथ हजारों वर्ष पहले से हमारा सांस्कृतिक और आगमिक तौर से संबंध है. हमारा भारत का संबंध उस दिन से है जिस दिन भगवान बुद्ध का जन्म हुआ था और सम्राट अशोक जिस दिन अपने पुत्र और पुत्री को श्रीलंका भेजा गया है उस दिन से हमारा सांस्कृतिक और धार्मिक संबंध जुड़ गया. और मेरा इस चीवर को पहन के यहाँ रहना भी सॉफ्ट पावर है. और जो विश्वविद्यालय को सांची बौद्ध विश्वविद्यालय है, जिसे मध्य प्रदेश सरकार और हम लोग का एक स्वप्न था, मेरा भी एक स्वप्न था कि सांची में एक विश्वविद्यालय बने, ताकि ये सॉफ्ट पावर को हम जगा सके, क्योंकि सांची एक ऐसी तीर्थ स्थल है जो पूरे विश्व को ये शांति का संदेश दिया है। तो क्यों न हम वहीं से ही फिर दोबारा शुरू करें। धन्यवाद।
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Next we have Maria Worth, and after that we'll follow with some questions.
Namaste to all of you. I would like to start with a sloka, because maybe I need some help. Om. Please join in. Sahana vavatu, sahana punaktu, sahaviryam garavavahe, tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I'm not used to talking. I'm a writer, and writing is very different from talking. But what David said is very true. Spirituality is, in all likelihood, the most important soft power which India has. At the same time, I feel it is because of this Sanatana Dharma, because of the knowledge which is here in India, that India is so strongly opposed. Maybe you have noticed that usually India is getting a very bad press in the West. And because this knowledge which is here, it makes so much sense. Like when we all came, we foreigners, when you have a chance to get familiar with a tradition, in fact, many Indians don't get a chance nowadays, unfortunately. So when for me, it was a book by Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga. I had not expected anything from India. I was on my way to Australia, and I came for wildlife sanctuaries. And I landed up in Kanyakumari, and I bought this book. And when I started to read it, I thought, my God, that's exactly what I always felt is true, but I could not have expressed it like that. So it made sense, and it means also we leave the church. The church doesn't have a hold anymore over us. And I think that is the reason why India is so much opposed, because the church had this experience some 200, 300 years back when the Vedas first reached Europe. Because the intellectual elite there, they were very much impressed. For example, Voltaire, he said the Vedas are the greatest gift for humanity. We are eternally indebted to India. So naturally, the church was not amused. So I feel this attitude towards Hinduism, which is now so prevalent, unfortunately. I mean, what is said is also true. Hinduism is growing and it's expanding. More and more people appreciate it, but it is still a fringe. When I was recently in Germany, I mean, I felt like a fish out of water. You cannot talk with anybody. Everybody just says, oh, when I'm dead, it's over. Many have left the church, but they become atheists because they don't know this knowledge. And I feel there's really an attempt that this knowledge which is here is not becoming common knowledge. For example, I was on a conference in 1982. It was my first assignment for a magazine, a German magazine. It was on the convergence between Indian wisdom and modern science. And it was organized by the Transpersonal Psychology Foundation Association. And at that time, it was very much acknowledged that the conference is held in India because Indian wisdom, Eastern wisdom, they called it, gives the background for this new branch of psychology. Transpersonal means it's based on Atma. Atma is transpersonal, it's not limited to a person. So at that time I was very happy. There were also physicists, Fritjof Capra was there, David Karl Pribram, I don't remember. So I felt very happy because I thought, oh, now we have the acknowledgement of science that Indian tradition is really true. I mean, if science supports it also, then it should sicker down to the common man. Now, surely, common man will also appreciate this knowledge which is here. But I was very mistaken. Now it's almost 40 years later, almost, yeah. And it got worse. I Googled transpersonal psychology and not one word about India. It says the fathers were Carl Jung, Abraham Maslow, and psychedelic movement, and then it says some Eastern spiritual belief systems have made this transpersonal psychology. So I felt really it was on purpose that India is not mentioned, and then it says also, the same article continues, some people, Christian authors criticize transpersonal psychology as a mishmash of New Age ideas, which are kind of dangerous for vulnerable youth who turn their back on institutionalized religion. So it is again a proof that it's dangerous. And I feel that is why the church also made basically Hinduism into the bracket of religion. It doesn't fit in there. Religion is a belief system. Yesterday it was defined, saying that a belief which is held strongly by many people. What nonsense. I mean, sorry, but when only because many people hold it, it doesn't need to be true. And we should also see that in the beginning, Christianity and Islam, in the 70s it was allowed to say this, now it's hardly allowed anymore to say, but they have grown by being bullies. They have bullied us into believing. In Germany, 800 AD, it was under death sentence. There was an Emperor Karl. Refusal of baptism meant you were likely to be killed. So, and Inquisition in Goa, it is not long ago. So I feel India, to come to the point, should stand up very strongly for, especially for 2 or 3 issues which are now catching up in the West, and it should own them, because now, even my mother once called me and said, oh, there was such a beautiful Christmas talk, and a former actress has given it. I said, what did she say? She said, Jesus is in your heart. You have to believe he's in your heart. So now this feeling that God has to be inside, it is now catching up in the West. And it is India's knowledge. And now I read, it is referred to as New Age knowledge. India is again cut out. A second point I find, because for me, in Vivekananda's books, his ocean and wave example was so touching, that Brahman is the ocean, and we are like waves on the ocean, and the waves are, of course, essentially nothing but Brahman. So India should own this divinity in everyone, including in nature, including in animals, which means also, please, I mean, for me it is such an issue, please, India, do promote vegetarianism. Because it's catching on now. I mean, there are now philosophers who say we don't have the right to kill animals. There was a steakhouse owner in Hamburg who said it pains him, especially when people leave food, don't finish eating, because they don't think what happened before this meat ends up on the plate. And we should, this massive slaughter, which is happening day in, day out, every second, right now, even, I mean, it's painful. I could never watch a video. And if we would see what is happening, we would all stop eating meat, I think. And then another important point I find is rebirth. India should own rebirth, should propagate it, because it makes sense. For us in the West, with the Christian God, we have a big problem. How is it that somebody is born in a poor house, somebody is born in a rich house, somebody is born with deformities, somebody, I mean, if God is just, how is it possible that he's so unjust? So if karma is not limited to one life, it makes sense. And there is also a lot of research. I met one professor in Delhi University, Professor N.K. Chatta. He worked together with Ian Stevenson in Virginia University. And he told stories which are amazing. And the only explanation which can be given that this child knows so much about another person who died before this child was born is memory, that it remembers. So, okay. So in rebirth also, India should kind of own it. And then maybe one more point. We are taught that Hindus go to hell. Most Christians don't believe it now anymore, but in religious class, basically in Muslim class also, you are inferior. So in my view, I feel now Muslim countries petition the United Nations that criticism of Islam should be banned. Is it possible for India to petition that this claim, which has no foundation in anything, that Hindus burn, Buddhists, also if Buddhists and Hindus could be together, and atheists or countries which are not majority Christian or Muslim, if they could, I mean, just to make noise, you know, or to make the issue known. Not much may happen with the United Nations because whatever, but just to put your foot down and say it's not acceptable that you teach your own people that we are inferior. What about the right to religious freedom? I mean, you cannot give a religion the freedom to denigrate you. When I am, as an individual, denigrate you, I will be pulled up. But a whole religion which denigrates you is respected. So, thank you very much.
It's very interesting to see that India has shared its dharmic traditions and its soft power through the spirituality throughout the world. In return, it's still under missionary attack, it's still under media attack. Why? Because it's presenting a higher point of view that threatens lesser civilizational values. So it shouldn't be a sign to feel that we're under siege and should give up. It should be a sign that these teachings are spreading, and we should have more confidence and more articulation in spreading these traditions and in having our own appreciation of them. And also in India itself, these traditions are under siege. And it's very important that in India itself that there is the awakening to its spiritual civilizational value. So now we have a few minutes for questions and answers. And we can pass the mic around, or how are we going to do this?
Fortunately, this session we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A. And may I request a show of hands, just to give me an idea as to how many people would like to ask questions? One? Right, so it'll be a shorter. We'll start with you, and please indicate whom you wish to ask to.
Merriam ma'am, my question is for you. Is the word religion is sufficient to explain Dharma?
Yes, we have a lot of terminology problems. And the terminology problems is that the terms of the Dharmic civilizations are always translated or brought into the terms of Western civilization, for which there is no real equivalent. So in terms of discussion, we have to use certain terms. Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, Hindu Dharma, Yoga Dharma, all these things. And then we have this term religion in the Western world. And we have to understand Dharma transcends religion. Hinduism, Buddhism are more than a religion, but we can't say they're not a religion, because then they lose the legal rights of being a religion in other countries and in India itself. So we need to be clear about terminology, but we also need to understand how terms are being used. And in that regard, Hinduism is only legal in a few countries of the world. It should be legal in all the countries of the world, and if it has to be legal, it can be called a religion, but it is more than a religion in the Western sense of the term.
Another question to
Sir, as per Hindu classics, Dheeraj, Dharam, Mitra or Nari, I'll translate it also. Patience, religion, friends, and the ladies have been kept at a very high pedestal, from where, the term soft power has just been coined. We can derive a lot of power. How do you place all these pedestals, all these verticals, to propagate, as India always follows, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam? That means the entire world is one family. And Hinduism is one religion. After every prayer, we always say, Vishwaka Kalyan Ho. That means, the blessing should be showered on the entire world and not on our country. May I request you to, throw some light that these verticals, they should be seamless, and how we can propagate, world as a family, because what was earlier global is now local. So we are a more, well-knit family. Your view, sir?
No, I would like to let one of the ladies respond, since you brought that up.
What was the question?
No, the question was about these values and the honoring of women and friendship and compassion. How should we bring these values out and show them?
I think just by our actions, and in some ways, looking again at the narratives, I've been doing a deep study of Sita Ma, in the last few years, and come to understand her in a completely new way. And so I think if we can get back into the time in which these things took place, then we will have a new understanding of some of these values, because we have gone through a rather dark period in our civilizational history, which I think we're coming out of now. The whole patriarchal period is a recent phenomenon of a few thousand years. There was a time before that, and we have to recall that. I think memory is very important. I don't think it's unimportant to look at our history, because our history goes back to the Satya Yuga, and we retain the memory of the Satya Yuga. We were there. It may not be in our conscious mind, but it's in our unconscious mind. And so to bring up these memories, I think, will help guide us forward. And this has to do with how we look at the land, how we look at the earth, how we look at everything, and the role of women. All of these things will come come into new right relationship if we can recall the way it was.
Suddenly,
as it appears, none of the five speakers were born in the land of India in this life at least. And having grown in other civilizational values, you identify with this space spiritually and in its civilizational values. I would like you to share whether that leads to some internal conflict or what it feels like to be in that space. Most of you are more Hindu or Buddhist than people born in India may feel themselves to be Hindu or Buddhist. What is that? Is there a dichotomy, and what does it mean? What I'm asking for is an insight which will inspire us to be more truly what we have to be.
Thank you. We'll take 2 questions and then we'll take answers. There are more people. Yeah, mic over piche dena.
Every language has got its own thought space, ideas and terms. I'm here. Every language has got its own thought space, ideas, terms. English is a very poor language to convey all this repertoire of what India has got. So how do we overcome this? Because when you map the Anglo-Saxon Abrahamic thought process, which is there in English, onto the Indic systems, you find a deficit. And you're bound to come up with a deficit and feel inferior, like Dr. David Frawley brought out. This is because the medium is English, an alien thought process which cannot convey many things that are there in the Indic system.
Just get on to your question, please.
So how do we overcome this, this language and thought space problem?
Okay, I would like to make a small point about how bridges can be built, because after all, if you look at the very heart of Sanatana Dharma, we are trying to see and trying to reinforce the idea that we are all the same family. And I just want to make a small point about the historical evolution of the various religious traditions, because we know that the Vedic Mitanni ruled West Asia, Syria, and so on for about 500 years in the 2nd millennium BC. And likewise, Aristotle's own student, where there's an inscription in Bactria, claims that according to Aristotle, whether it's right or wrong, that the Jews came to West Asia from India. So there are all kinds of connections. Now, all of them may not be historically true, which perhaps might explain that we should attempt harder to find commonality, which would also do wonders to eliminate misunderstandings across various traditions.
Yes, I'll just answer that Subhash briefly, is that of course we have this whole neo-pagan movement coming up in the world, and indigenous peoples movement, and the Hindus and the Buddhists need to support that more so. Relative to the question, obviously we need to bring more Sanskrit terms into English. They're coming into some degree. And we need to eventually have certain terms. Moksha cannot be called salvation. There are so many terms that we have to go back to the original term. For Atma, Paramatma, these things have to be emphasized, and they are coming in. Now, relative to those born in the West having to deal with becoming a Hindu, I think Maria can probably tell us also a little bit more about that struggle involved there.
Actually, it was quite simple. My family didn't like it. I wrote articles quite soon. I had to find a way to get a visa and get some money. So I started to write articles, and they were taken. And I wrote also once about a guru. I was with Sai Baba at that time. And somebody told my mother, I think your daughter has a guru. And this was the greatest insult she could have told to my mother. So my mother told me that she has to be ashamed of me. So this was not so nice, but for the last 15 years, she passed away now, but for the last 15 years, she was very happy that I'm in India. She knew I was happy. I was telling her a lot about what I learned here, and she was open to it. She was even criticizing the church. At the beginning, she once said, I mentioned Buddha and Jesus in one sentence, and she said, how can you mention Jesus and Buddha in one sentence? So, I mean, you see how the brainwashing is there. It's not so easy to get out, but for me it was somehow easy, maybe because I was in a nuns' boarding school and I got a bit too much of Christianity.
Some of you touched upon the challenges that Hindu Dharma faces as a result of missionary narratives. But I wanted to ask a question about Marxist narratives that largely come from within the community, meaning other Hindus, from academia, that have resulted in a conflation of Hindu Dharma and caste, or Hindu Dharma and political realities and interreligious tensions, and how we might better create narratives that return people's understanding, or at least improve people's understandings about where these social situations rest within Hindu teachings, or where Hindu teachings offer solutions to some of the problems that we see on the ground.
I have a very specific question, because we are talking about spirituality and power is essentially political. When we are talking about soft power projection through spirituality, and there are various ways that we have been doing this unconsciously without any political, Swamiji spoke about the way Buddhism traveled, or many, but what is happening now, and perhaps Dena has already indicated about it. For example, you take, say, Swaminarayan. It suddenly takes a sectarian dimension, it becomes a sect, and suddenly it is delinked either from India or for the larger Hindu tradition. So when we are talking about spirituality as a soft power tool, how to overcome this particular dilemma of without becoming too political and still retaining the true dharmic philosophy behind it? How to deal with this?
We'll have the last question, then we'll request the chair and the panelists. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, So I was just thinking the term religion comes from the Latin religare, which means to unite, and which is common with the idea of yoga, essentially. But unfortunately, the way the monotheistic religions have done it is that they have based themselves primarily on the idea of belief, that theirs is the only truth. So I was just wondering, how do we bridge this gap of these monotheistic religions, especially that say that ours is the only truth? If one fundamentally is convinced about that premise, then at what point can one even start having a dialogue with any other way of looking at truth? And also, Islam and Christianity for Mariaji, this is just, are they political revolutions or are they religious? So just Islam?
No, I feel both dogmatic religions, they are power structures. In my feelings, they use this innate feeling that there must be a God, there must be some great power, great intelligence behind this universe. Naturally, I mean, it's a huge universe. Earlier, we didn't even know it was so huge. No? When you grow up as a Christian, you still think it's heaven and God is there. So I feel dialogue is not possible. I went to 2 dialogues, interfaith dialogue. And it was so strange because the Christians praised their Christianity, but they would talk from personal experience only. Jesus has helped me so much. Muslims would praise Islam. And I wrote an article once, I started it like this, and Hindus they praised Christianity and Islam. I mean, it was very sad. And because you don't stand up for, because maybe you don't know what we are taught. It is very clear that Christianity started the whole thing. Islam followed it later, saying this alone is the truth. If you don't believe it, then you are arrogant because it is God's word. And when you say, what is the proof? When you are dead, you know that we were right, and then you can go to heaven. So this feeling, maybe the church is right, this is there, but I feel basically we have to work towards drawing people out. The clergy will not reform. The clergy has an interest in, they have money, they live from it, no? But in Europe now so many Christians have left. So I feel people have to be made to see sense, and the sense is here in India.
May I speak? I'd like to answer 3 questions. The first question, what do I feel like as a non-Indian in India? First, I need to say that I love India. India has been my salvation. Without India, God alone knows what would have happened to me. I feel as if I'm a stranger in a strange land in India, but Indians are very patient with me in my ignorance. So for that, I thank everyone. Secondly, the person talking about the limitations of English and the richness of Sanskrit and Indian philosophy. Hinduism is a transcendental religion. We are all seekers in whatever way we look. We are all seekers. We have various equipment with us in order to understand this world. We're able to accumulate a vocabulary to identify objects in this world. And with this knowledge, we're expanding our consciousness. But ultimately, there are no words for that which is, for want of a better term, the beyond. We are all seeking the great light. And that light is ineffable. It has no name. It has no form. The third one, in regard to political power, all true religions ultimately have one question: what is death? All of us are preparing ourselves for that great transition. If a person wants to become involved with political power using religion, so be it. But it is a diversion. If you are true to yourself, you will ask yourself, who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? Each person is responsible for that. We cannot ask somebody else to answer those questions. We have to answer them for ourselves. Thank you.
I just want to say something about building bridges, because that is the work of the interfaith movement. And while I have a lot of frustration with the conventional interfaith organizations, who I think are still back 20 years, there has been progress. And I think the key is picking your dialogue partners carefully, make sure there's gender balance and balance between the Abrahamic and Dharma traditions. That's key. Without those two balances, the dialogue will not be successful. But if you have a balanced dialogue, and if you pick your dialogue partners carefully and are very conscious of language, I think there can be much success. And I think many bridges have been built. I have seen huge evolution in the Christian leaders that I work with, in their acceptance and embracing of Hinduism. That wasn't true 20 years ago. And we've moved from tolerance to respect to really embracing. But again, this is something that has to be very carefully worked on, because many interfaith organizations are still back 20 years ago, when it's an Abrahamic boys' club.
Just a point on the political issue. We live in a political world. We live where votes count. And Hindus have been the least political of any people in the world, and the least to defend their traditions as equally as they would defend any others. So this also has to be borne in mind. That there is spiritual soft power, we should not neglect all the other aspects of soft power or even hard power as long as we're dealing with this material world, this world in transition, the power of media, the power of academia, the power to create narratives, the power of education, the Bharatiya model, the Dharmic civilizations model on all levels has to be brought back, not simply to help India, but to bring this whole Dharmic orientation back to all of humanity. So I think we've had a good discussion, and we want to thank our panel, excellent panel of diverse speakers. And I would like, Bangalothera, if you could make some final comment for us on how you see us going forward.
Well, I was listening to you all, and what I felt is the religion is, I don't know whether you like it or not, religion is, I think, something your personal things. Before that, humanity comes first. We all are humans. So I think all the humans, if you feel that you are only a human, you are not Hindu, you are not Buddhist, you are not Christian, you are not Muslim. So I think you can live very peacefully under one roof. When the Dharma comes, then only we will have walls in between. So in my way of life, Dharma, I recall at my shrine or in my room or in my temple. But when I'm out of temple, I forget about that, whether I'm a monk or Buddhist. We all are one. So, for example, that's why I'll tell you, that the Pope, the present Pope of Rome, when he visited Sri Lanka, without informing me, he came to see me. Then, the holy man like him, there were so many superior monks in Sri Lanka, superior temples in Sri Lanka. He would have visited that. Since he has come to me, I knew it's because that's my way of life, because I have good friends, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Jews and everything. And that's why I think this discussion, today's discussion is very fruitful, especially to the Indians, because India is full of spirituality. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. With this, this session draws to a close. Before we get on to the felicitations, may I request the audience to give a very warm round of applause to the chair and our distinguished panelists. May I request Dr. David Frawley to kindly felicitate our panelists, please. Please go. Ms. Dina, Merriam. Mr. Christopher Quilking. Venerable Bangalathero. Oh, actually, you've changed the sequence? No, Mr. Christopher Quilty, please. Mr. Christopher Quilty. May I request Ms. Lalita Kumaramangalam, Director, India Foundation, to kindly come up to felicitate Dr. David Frawley, the chair of the session. We'll be starting the next session immediately, and for the boarding passes, all the people who have to deposit the boarding passes kindly do so. The speakers from abroad, the boarding passes, kindly do that immediately, please.